Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MIT Alumni Association's first MIT Alumni Forum of the academic year. I'm Whitney Espich. I'm the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I am delighted that so many of our alumni and alumni, as well as our MIT students, faculty, staff, and friends, are logging in for this program. In 2023, our global community is celebrating two milestones in the history of women at MIT. The first is the 150th anniversary of the Institute awarding its first degree to a woman, the original MIT alumna, Ellen Swallow Richards. The second milestone is happening now, in the present, with so many women occupying MIT's most senior academic positions at one time. This is a moment to acknowledge the hard-earned progress of women in the academy, and perhaps even more important, to see firsthand the remarkable leadership at MIT that we are currently enjoying at the top. Right now, I'm joined by the Institute's 18th president, the second woman to hold the office, Dr. Sally Kornbluth, also MIT provost and an MIT graduate degreed alumna herself, Dr. Cindy Barnhart, MIT Chancellor Dr. Melissa Nobles, who succeeded Cindy in the provost role, and Maria Zuber, Vice President for Research and soon to be the Institute's Presidential Technology and Policy Advisor. Thank you all for your groundbreaking leadership and for taking time from the pressurized business of running MIT. This is a really special place, as Paul Gray often called it, and thank you for joining us for this MIT Alumni Forum. As one might imagine, our event participants are eager to hear from you on a spectrum of topics, and I have some questions for each one of you. We also take questions from the audience, so audience, please go ahead and submit your questions throughout the program, and we might have time to answer a few. So President Kornbluth, Sally, let's start with you. You're 1/4 of the way through your first academic year at MIT. What thoughts are you having? What impressions have you formed about this new academic home?
Thanks, Whitney. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. So I have to say, MIT is an amazing place. I knew this from the outside, but seeing it from the inside is even more incredible. So, first of all, I have to say that every one-to-one person that I've met who's associated with MIT is incredibly proud to be here, and with very good reason. I have to say, every day I learn of some new, honestly, just mind-blowing discovery or activity that's going on here. And every student I meet is just so passionate, so enthusiastic. And so just the overwhelming excellence of the place is wonderful. And I have to say, this was really reinforced as soon as I arrived at MIT, because I arrived just in time for a cycle of promotion and tenure where I got to see a veritable showcase of the excellence that is MIT. And every single one of the cases was, a singularity in their field, just at the top and doing so many wonderful things. As part of my early days, I've been doing a listening tour, going from department to department to department, to the labs and centers, meeting with students, meeting with staff. And, again, one thing I've seen is this pride to be part of the MIT enterprise, but also I think just the urge to do some really big things together. And so top of the list are addressing problems like climate change, thinking carefully about the upside and the potential of AI, but also using MIT's expertise to understand the limitations and the guardrails that we have to put in place, thinking about how we want to educate this and the next generation of MIT students. And so I think there's a hunger to get together, to do impactful things for society, and to think about how we make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. So I'm excited about that. And I think leading MIT is really about harnessing all of that excellence and, essentially steering the ship, but not really trying to constrain what the incredible people here are doing.
That's just wonderful to hear that the vision piece is coming together, and that you have already a strong sense of the wonderful community at MIT and all of the talent and resources that are at this institution's disposal. I want to weave in some of our leaders who are with us today. Provost Barnhart, formerly Chancellor, as the Chief Budget and Academic Officer, you helped to move priority items and strengthen MIT's research and academic enterprise. How does your work, in partnership with the President and the other officers here, deans and other key leaders, impact the world? Are there barriers that you need to break down, or is it smooth sailing from your perspective?
maybe a little of both.
Mhm.
So when I think about our aspirations to impact the world, I think we achieve it through two major channels. One is research and the other is education, not surprisingly. And, if you think about research and impacting the world, the way we do it is by tapping into what Sally just described, our incredibly talented community. So this community, Sally has learned on her listening tour, is really driven to make a difference. And, so our role, I think, is to listen to them, see where their passions lie, and help them realize their goals. So they're driven, we've learned, to make a difference in a lot of different ways, but we've heard a lot about climate. We've heard a lot about AI, health, quantum. And, I think our role is to help them do their best work. As simple as that. So how do we do that? Well, we create the conditions where they can do that. And one condition is for us to be able to continue to attract and retain talent. Because if they're surrounded by talent, then again, we're all set. I think part of what we need to do and have been doing to continue to attract and retain talent is to make strategic investments in space, in equipment, and in administration, for example, research administration, in systems. And I think the other role that we can play is we can help connect faculty to one another, because what you see with these big challenges is that you need to bring people together from different disciplinary areas of expertise.
Yeah.
And it's through that bringing together of different perspectives that big leaps are being made. So as Sally talks about a lot, like part of what we're trying to do is bring people together so that they know about each other's work and their efforts can combine to have the biggest impact. And then I'll just say something about education as well. I think that what we'd like to do in our efforts collectively are to innovate, to define, to implement 21st century education. And what we see with our students coming to MIT is they, like the rest of our community, are passionate about solving some of the world's toughest problems. So while, of course, you have students who are interested in pushing the boundaries of existing disciplines, we also have a lot of students who are interested in combining expertise from different disciplines so that they can go out into the world and make a difference. And so over the past several years, we've been innovating in our curriculum and creating new degrees that cross schools, across departments and schools. And these new degrees are some of our fastest growing degrees. And so again, it's our job to help our faculty have the resources so that they can continue to innovate and define this education of the 21st century that our students are asking for.
You've got a powerful combination when you have a faculty that are racing forward and then students, when they arrive, are ready to race faster if they possibly can. Absolutely. It sounds to me like you're trying to line all of that up so that our students have just an optimized, might be a word you would use, experience while they're on campus.
It might be a word I'd use, Whitney.
It might be a word you'd use. This is great. And I also appreciated hearing the natural alignment between what you were talking about, Cindy, and Sally's own thoughts about somehow helping MIT continue to make the sum add up to something that's greater than what one would expect. That's fabulous. All right. Well, let's turn to Chancellor Melissa Nobles. Chancellor, welcome. And you are responsible for all things students, or as you say, the whole student. How are the students today? what are you and your team doing to ensure that our community thrives in that educational realm and in that well-being and student life realm? And what kinds of things are you most proud of as you look at our student body today?
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Whitney. And good afternoon, everyone. So I'd say the kids are all right. The students are doing fine. As you would expect, they are focusing on their studies, on their lives on campus, dorm life, their extra curriculums, their friends and such. So they're fine. And as deeply connected as they are to their student community here, they also are engaged with the world. They're concerned about the world, as both Sally and Cindy described, that is wanting to make an impact. And so they're in the world as well as being right here on the MIT campus, and they see a connection between the two. My team works day in and day out to ensure that we attend to the whole student. By the whole student, we mean the experiences of student life, both inside and outside of the classroom. And we kind of focus on three main parts of a whole student experience. The first is thinking about ensuring their academic success. They're here as students and they want to do well. And that's not, with the highly motivated students we have at MIT, that's something that keeps us busy, making sure that we're meeting their high expectations. The second is that we think about, at the same time, cultivating personal relationships as well as thinking about their own intellectual growth. Students today are as much concerned about their own self-development and expect that we provide guidance and time for them in ways by which they can do that. And thirdly, we think about fostering community and well-being, since students are also mindful that their well-being isn't just individual, that is personal growth and intellectual growth, but as well their engagement with their student community, their MIT community, their homes, and then their country, and then ultimately the world. So we have an engaged student body that sees community both in a quite local way and a quite global way. And that seems very much resonant when we think about MIT. The thing I'm most proud of, and I've come to see this and appreciate this as chancellor, is the deeply collaborative nature of my team's connection with students. They know that not only student leadership, although that is an important part of it, but nearly all parts of the Institute, our staff and faculty, whether they're in the dorms, whether they're in the dining halls, whether they're on the school teams, in classrooms, in organizations and clubs, there are many touch points between faculty, staff, and students. And so I'm so appreciative of that, because we can't do things without collaboration. That is also a hallmark of MIT, and it's reflected well in our relationship with our students. So I'm most proud of that, in part because we couldn't do what we do without the students believing that it's an important thing for them to be involved in. Everything is usually better. It's not always easy. I'm not going to say that sometimes our engagements can be messy. But that also is a part of human interactions. But all together, we are all enriched and made better by our collaboration. So that's what I'm most proud of.
Yeah, student life, student engagement, it's a full contact sport. You all are deep in it all the time, and the students are deep in it with each other, helping one another. And I think you have just the most impressive way of connecting with that community and making sure that they feel supported through all kinds of situations that are happening in the outside world. We'll go back to later a little bit about how alumni can help. Certainly the student life world is one where alumni feel very connected, and they obviously were students once themselves.
I look forward to that. I have some ideas that I like to share. So when we get back to that, we can do that.
Exactly. Excellent. All right. So I wanted to just check in with Maria and hear a little bit from her as well. Maria, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your policy work. You've been at MIT for quite a while and occupied a variety of roles. You know this place inside and out and can represent it so well, especially on the research side. Perhaps you could talk about the CHIPS Act work or, other things that are going on in Washington, D.C.
Certainly. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in this afternoon. So policy is one of the important things that allows MIT to maximize its impact. So MIT is all about making the world a better place. And if you have great ideas and even great discoveries in the lab, but there aren't policies that allow those great ideas to be enacted and to be scaled up and to get out into the world, then you can't have the impact that you want to have. Often when you work in Washington, it's really hard to know what influence you've actually had. Okay, so first of all, I should say we never go down there and ask for something for MIT. Okay, we advocate for things that are important in research, important in academia, important in education, important in innovation and entrepreneurship. So things that are good for the country and good for the world in that standpoint. And sometimes the best you can do is prevent bad things from happening. Okay, but in the case of the CHIPS Act, it's actually called the Chips and Science Act, we can actually see evidence that MIT has had a tangible input into putting this act forward. So actually several years ago, a number of us from the senior administration put together a white paper with some ideas for how we can do a better job of taking fundamental research for problems that we know we need solutions to. And so that important parts of that white paper evolved into what went into the science part of the Chips and Science Act, which led to a new directorate in the National Science Foundation, which is the largest funder of basic research that's non-medical, non-life science in the U.S. On the CHIPS side of the act, I'm currently co-chairing the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, and we did a study on the research and development, how to make the most of the investment of the research and development part of the CHIPS Act, in the hopeful anticipation that the bill would pass. And it turned out that the bill did pass, and most of the funding in it is for infrastructure. It's for building semiconductor factories, but a significant part of the funding is for research and development. And that plan was put together by the Department of Commerce. And when I got pre-briefed on it, it was almost verbatim what the PCAST report said. And we had representation on that by Anantha Chandrakasan, who's our Dean of Engineering, and others who have had interactions with MIT. So those were cases where we absolutely had some influences. So one of the things that's being talked about a lot in Washington, D.C. and everywhere else now is artificial intelligence, and particularly the generative AI. And this is a real game changer. It's going to force us to all do things differently than we've been doing them. And MIT has we've had faculty who have done briefings for the entire Senate, where most of the senators actually attended this in person. They've briefed the House. Members of our corporation have briefed members in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and our group PCAST has actually done 2 90-minute briefings on AI with President Biden. So getting 3 hours of the president's time to brief him on AI, I can tell you that the president is absolutely up to speed on AI and very much understands both the issues, but importantly also the opportunities and what it could mean for science. So we're always looking for more opportunities to educate and inform, and we try to do it in an unbiased and an objective way, so that when people want good, balanced information, they come to us, and they seem to do that.
Thank you for that just compelling overview of what has been going on, what is going on in Washington, D.C. in terms of MIT's conversation around matters that affect science and technology or that could be influenced in that way. And also sharing your work on the President's Council of Advisors in Science and Technology, the PCAST group that you were talking about. On occasion, the Washington, D.C. office for MIT, loops in alumni who live in states where there are people who have concerns about various issues to just be a part of the conversation. And I wanted to just acknowledge that as a connection point where alumni can help. It's not a huge flow of activity, but that is a really nice place for people who have a perspective that's useful to connect with MIT. Thank you, Maria, for that overview of your important work and MIT's important influence. Pausing on that alumni piece and going back to Melissa, just to pause on the education moment that we had earlier, maybe now would be a good time to, how can alumni help in that sphere? We've just touched on the political sphere. Is there something you'd like to offer up in terms of the education sphere?
Yeah, I think there are two things I'd like to say. They likely are intuitive, but I do want to kind of reaffirm their importance. The first is, of course, having alums engage with our students as mentors, reaching out and such. I can't tell you how many times I talk to students and they have some view about what their life past MIT will be, what their career will be, that may be will be enhanced had they had some connection with alums who thought the same and who went out into the world and may be able to tell them, I thought that, but it went this way, or you never know what's going to happen, just to have some view of what life is like beyond MIT. From recent alums and from older alums, it doesn't matter, alum experience, it works. It has a lot more weight than the chancellor saying it. I can tell you that much, right? They're like, what do you know? Let's talk to an alum who's going through the experiences I have and can give us some insight. So one is just engagement with our current students. That would be terrific. And there are two reasons for it. As I said, it gives students a view of what life is like after MIT. And as importantly, it models kind of what an alumni can be. So when they become alums, they can have an idea, well, I was touched by that alum, or that alum really helped me. I want to do the same. It helps. The stronger, you have a great alumni base, of course, and we're deeply appreciative of all of that engagement. And we're encouraging all those who have been involved to continue to stay involved, and those who may not be as involved as they would like to be, to encourage them to do so. It really matters to our students. We've got tons of ways through mentorships, entrepreneurship, internships, all of it. There are plenty of touches that we encourage that engagement, and I want to have a call out to that. So thank you, Whitney, for providing me that opportunity.
Well, yes, and the appreciation, I'm sure, is well felt by everyone in this Zoom. That was great. All right, circling back to Sally, just to, we've had kind of a landscape of all of the things that are going on and all of the ambitions that exist, just hints of that. I'm interested in just giving you a chance to talk about something you've described as rapid incrementalism as your one important piece of your leadership style. Can you tell us more about this approach and how this fits into the commitments that MIT is making for moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Whitney. So I do want to make a distinction between a vision that is incremental versus a style of getting there. So I'm hoping the vision is expansive and has fabulous distant goals in mind, et cetera. So what we want for MIT to achieve is certainly not incremental. We want to have world-changing impact in many, many different areas. But when I talk about rapid incrementalism, I really talk about a sort of leadership style that started when I was leading a lab. So, when you write grants and you start thinking about where you want your lab to go, you stake out long-term goals. But there is a lot between the start of a project and hitting that goal. And the question really is how you get there. And in experimental science, a big piece of getting there is integrating the results you're getting along the way and making rapid and, nimble changes. So if I know, for instance, I used to work in cancer biology, if I know that I'm trying to get to, some knowledge or understanding of how cancer cells might respond, for example, to a chemotherapeutic drug, there's a whole lot of ways I can get there. That's my goal. But as I start to do experiments, I'm getting data, I'm getting results. and I'm shifting and, you know, reacting to the information coming in while still trying to get to that goal. Now, I was in a very, very competitive scientific field. So you can increment any way you want, but you better be quick about it. Integrate the data, move, pivot, and advance the ball down the field. And so when I think about leadership of something as sort of vast and complex as MIT, there are a lot of long-term goals, but there are incoming from all over the Institute and indeed the world all the time. So you can have a goal, but if you decided exactly how you were going to get there ahead of time, you would come up against reality pretty quickly. You have to actually think about what's happening on campus all the time, how the actions of one group might impact what another group is doing. And so my feeling is I like to have myself and also the leadership team have their ear to the ground. You know, Cindy mentioned this in terms of really listening to the faculty, knowing what they're doing. Same with the students. You know, you have to see how each action is reverberating across the Institute. Integrate that information, and then, you know, make mid-course corrections as necessary while making sure that the whole mission doesn't get off course. And so it's just, you know, rapidly changing actions to get us where we want to go. And I found two things. One is it's pragmatic in that all of us make a million decisions a day on a lot of small things. So keeping your long-term goal is important, but it also lends itself to a style where many, many different people's voices can be heard and impact the outcome. Whereas if you had a specific single path in mind before you started, it would wind up being, you know, more of a top-down command and control operation, which honestly would never work at a place like MIT anyway, because everyone has so many different ideas and different ways they want to do things. But again, we've got to move rapidly because if not, first of all, MIT will lose, if you will, in competition with a lot of other entities, but also because many of the problems that face us are existential threats. For example, you know, when we talk about climate change, we can't sort of sit back and hope that we come up with some nice solution a decade from now. We have to start making these incremental steps, making progress so we can either slow the pace of climate change or even, you know, honestly turn back the clock somewhat and try to figure out a way that we're going to wind up in a better place than we are now.
Thank you for that. And all of that really does resonate with the culture at MIT. Maybe some of what you were saying at the beginning of your answer about a vision not being something that is set in cement in the MIT context, but that also can be iterative. Even as you're listening on your listening tour, you're making course corrections and adjustments in your own mind around the direction and learning about who are the people in the community who can take it forward. Is that the kind of thing that you're explaining? Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
no, absolutely. Absolutely.
And are there ways at this point where you can sense that alumni can help, or is that something for a future conversation?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple things. You know, one thing is that as we develop some of our vision and our sort of practical plans for some of these big initiatives at MIT, a big important part of it is not only how it resonates and plays internally, but how it's perceived by the broader community and the outside world. This is important both because we're trying to have impact through changes in policies, processes, and human behavior, but also because what sounds good to us in sort of the internal kind of, you know, not echo chamber, but internal dialogue may not play well or resonate with those outside. So I think, you know, as we develop some of these visions, we will be calling on alumni, members of the community to have feedback and input into whether, you know, the way we're thinking, the visions we're articulating makes sense. So that's a kind of direct way. The other thing, you know, honestly, as we start to formulate how we're going to develop the resources that support this vision, we'll want to tap into the expertise, the help. And I don't only mean financial resources, I mean also intellectual resources. Right. You know, a lot of the things we want to do are in partnership with different industries, with other, you know, nonprofit organizations, with governmental entities. And, you know, the great thing is that MIT alumni are represented in all of these places. And for us to be able to tap into that network to form the kind of partnerships we're going to need to actually get things done, I think is going to be really important. So some of the people I've already met through alumni, will say, well, I know so-and-so who knows so-and-so who knows so-and-so who you might want to talk to about this. And that's been a very, very helpful in shaping our thinking.
It really does seem like there's an activation that's possible in a different kind of way in this moment. So thank you for calling that out. We're about to move to questions from the audience. And while I give everybody a chance to put in another question before we get to that part, I thought I'd move to kind of a lighter topic for our leaders here. I think it's kind of safe to say that no middle school kid says, oh, hey, I want to be an academic leader in a major research university, that's not something that's talked about at the kitchen table. So, I'm just guessing that for each of you, the path to where you are now wasn't a straight line. I wonder if each of you would just reflect a little bit on crucial conversations or moments when you realized, and now, here you are. If you could say a little bit about that. And I wonder if, Cindy, maybe you would start with that.
Sure.
I'll ask each of you, though. So think, ladies. Yeah.
Sure. I'll start. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't think about leadership as an aspiration in middle school or in grad school or as a faculty member, as a matter of fact. So it's, there's a study done at MIT, and Deborah Ann Conan is one of the authors, and it talks about MIT faculty and how they exhibit this trait of reluctant leadership. And I definitely fall into that category. So I'll try to explain what I mean by that. As a faculty member, that I think most of us would say there's just nothing more fun than working with your students, working on research, teaching, and really the exhilaration that comes from that. And so leadership, taking on these roles, in my mind was always one of, you have to give back. It's service. And so I got involved as a leader, it's first at the center level, and then moved from there into the role of Associate Dean of Engineering, and then Interim Dean of Engineering, and then Chancellor, and now Provost. And in each one of those cases, it really was driven by a sense of giving back and duty. But somewhere along the lines, certainly something shifted. And as I reflect on it, I think maybe what shifted is I realized that working to solve many of the challenging problems at MIT to help people have a big impact looked a lot like my research problems, only they're harder because they involve people. And something about the puzzle that resulted from trying to figure out, in my research mind, how you take this constrained optimization problem and try to make a difference became real to me. Instead of just something I did because I needed to pay back, it was something that motivated me and gave me joy. Some of the time, most of the time, I'll say.
I know. I love that story. How the challenge mapped to challenges you'd solved before, and you could see that you could bring your skills and your experience to that. Thank you for sharing that. Melissa, I wonder if you'd go next.
Thanks, Whitney. Yeah, I'll. My field is political science, and I'd always taken some comfort in knowing that I simply studied politics. I wasn't in it. And that I appreciated knowing how things worked, but that, as I said, so it gave me a comfortable remove, and it was a remove that was partly satisfying for the reasons that Cindy described, which is that it's interesting. So it's intellectually interesting, and it provided a certain amount of emotional distance. But at some point when you think about it, as President Roosevelt said, kind of you have to be in the ring. There is something in the doing, not only the studying. Now, studying and working and research is a form of work, so it is action. But there are different kinds of actions. And I think as I got more at MIT and became more involved with my department when I became head, it gave me another view of what acting as an academic could be. And I liked kind of the vista that it provided, in part because it allowed me to be doing in a different kind of way. And it made the questions, back to what Cindy said, the questions that I thought about as a scholar look different when you're one of the actors. And that's what I've learned, and came to think that, okay, I want to be he said the man in the arena. I want to be the woman in the arena. And so far, it's not easy, but I've enjoyed it, as Cindy said. And I should say also, given such a great job that Cindy did as chancellor, it's kind of hard succeeding someone like Cindy, but I do my best.
It's the good news, bad news of having such a strong leadership team, right?
It's all good. You definitely
you all complement one another.
Every day is a learning experience, which I deeply appreciate. So thank you for the question.
Thank you for that, Melissa. So far, each of you have said have been very inspiring to me, and I'm sure our audience is feeling the same way. Maria, could you share a little bit of your story?
Sure. So following up on what Cindy said, if there was an award for reluctant leadership, I would win. Okay, because the year that they were looking for a department head in my department, I was on sabbatical, and I got a phone call one night saying, "How come you're not answering any of the dean's emails?" And I said, "Because I'm on sabbatical." And they says, "You need to come in and talk to the dean." And there was a department committee to search for a department head, and they wanted me to be department head, which, was not in my thinking absolutely whatsoever. I was on sabbatical so that I could just work on my space missions and, write some papers. And so, but I'll tell you, when your colleagues give you the vote of confidence that you should be the leader, that was really important to me. That they thought that I could and should do that. So that's kind of how I got into doing some administration. And then when Raphael became president, in my research, I ran big projects. My research had, sometimes hundreds of people from institutions all over the country. And he said, MIT is all about big research, and you know how to do big science. So, you can take care of our situation, and it's, time for you to step up and to do that. So, that is, that is kind of how I got into this situation. And, like Sally or like Cindy and Melissa said, I get a lot of joy out of problem solving. Okay. And actually, having worked on space missions, sometimes things blow up on the pad and sometimes they disappear in space, and you've spent all this time on it and you don't get to write any papers. But you learn so much. It's not just a pile of hardware that you get. It's you learn from the experience, and so the whole journey to me is gratifying. And so administration is kind of like that. It's the whole process of helping others succeed means as much as myself succeeding. In fact, even more because it's a force multiplier.
I love hearing those stories. Thank you, Maria. And just hearing the commitment each one of you have made. Sally, I wonder if you would share just a little bit of your own journey to this
Sure,
place.
I have to say, I'm inspired by my colleagues here, who I think may have been higher minded than I was when I got into administration, motivated by a sense of duty and complex problem solving. I actually had a much simpler story in a way, which is I was running a lab in a medical school, and I was just tremendously frustrated by the inability to do certain things that I thought a top-notch scientific institution should be able to do. And, I wanted to be able to sequence the proteins we were purifying in an easy way. I wanted to have the best graduate students come to our program. And so, you can complain all you want, but, when the opportunity to actually do something about the things that you're complaining about, is put before you, I think, you have to take the opportunity, put your sort of time where your mouth is, your money where your mouth is. And so when a position opened up where I could see that I could establish core facilities for the institution that would benefit not only my research in a way that would address all the things I was frustrated about, but also benefit the research of everyone else in the community, that was tremendously exciting. And when I saw that by changing our admissions practices, we really could get much stronger graduate students and create more of a community, it was incredibly gratifying. And, I agree completely with what Maria just said. We all of us have done our own scholarly work, but I think what becomes really addictive in administration is the realization that it is a force multiplier. Everything that we do has reverberating impact on research way beyond what we could do. So even if my own cancer research would, make some important advances that I'd publish and people would read and they would alert the community, the work I could do as an administrator would help dozens and dozens of cancer researchers, dozens and dozens of researchers across all sorts of fields, and really, honestly, just advance areas in a way that could potentially have world impact. And so my coming to administration was started with maybe not a very altruistic motivation, but very quickly, snowballed into the realization that there was an incredible gratification in enabling the success of other people. And honestly, the reason I came to MIT when I was very happy where I was that the potential for impact through enabling the work of others was just so incredible at MIT that it was the ultimate in impact of having an academic leadership role.
This was thank you, Sally. These were just phenomenal comments, and just the shift to a generosity of spirit around the effort that needs to go into solving problems, getting things done. I've heard some of you talk about getting boulders out of the way. And yet it's a generosity of spirit toward your fellow academics, toward the students, toward everyone in the MIT community. Thank you, each of you, for what you do. All right, we've got some questions from the audience. And Maria, I'm going to start with you, but others can also comment on this. I'll invite that. How can MIT help Washington, D.C. regain those who have lost public trust in science? What are proactive steps we might take?
Oh, well, wow. I wish I knew the answer to that one.
Right.
Wouldn't that be fantastic?
Yeah.
There's a saying, all politics is local. Okay. And so influence what you can, where you can. So actually somebody in your hometown may not react well to somebody at MIT, parachuting in and speaking great truths. Okay. Whether it be Washington, DC, or, wherever, Columbus, Ohio, pick a great location. Now, if you happen to have grown up in Columbus, Ohio, though, when I go back to areas where I grew up, which don't have the same political leanings that I do, even though I've worked for both Republican and Democratic presidents. I mean, I go in and I start and I talk about myself, and I say, I grew up in this area. I was taught by the teachers who were educated in this area. I worked really hard. I did all my homework. I got into a good school. I studied, and so this is what I think about this. And so you try to build up credibility how you can. And sometimes if it's not a place from which you emerged, You've got to find the right people who can be the messengers and who can be trusted. And sometimes it's community leaders. I mean, it could be religious leaders, students, who are going to MIT or who graduated from MIT. You're an alum going back to kind of where you grew up or where you're living now. You've got credibility that kind of the smart people at the big universities don't have. And so that's, you're not going to solve the whole problem of trust in Washington right now, because it's not just in Washington, and it's not just trust of academic institutions, it's trust of all institutions. I mean, there's no trust of, our political representatives, there's no trust of law enforcement, there's no trust of academia. It's pervasive through society. So, but on an individual basis, generally people are good. And you've got to find people who have some doubt and are willing to get into a conversation. So do it slowly.
That's great advice. I wonder if anyone wants to add anything to that from your own recent experiences.
I think one thing that, in a situation where so much of our society is really polarized, I think, being absolutist is difficult. And I think, showing understanding and empathy and listening to the other side can be extremely useful. The other thing is, one thing about MIT's action in Washington, and, others have alluded to this, is that we can actually have an impact because we do go to Washington and say, what can we help you with, rather than the converse. So I think many times getting people to listen to what you have to say starts with coming with sort of open hand, saying, we can help you with something. And that will open the conversation, I think, in a way that simply asking for things won't.
That's great. Thank you for that guidance for people in the audience who want to make a difference. Start locally, start small, and find a way to connect. Melissa, here's a question for you. With so many issues facing young adults, how do you, as leaders, prioritize what is most important for such a diverse student population of high potential learners who are, each unique and with such a variety of needs to achieve their full potential? How do you prioritize in that setting?
Yeah, it's the way we think about it is, it's true. While we have a diverse set of students, and they do have their own particular needs, it is true that many of them are concerned about their person. That is kind of how they're doing. So we approach it, meaning we assume that they're interested in their own self-well-being. We assume that they're interested in building community. So we may not know the content of that, but we do know that that would be something that they're interested in, and we give them permission to tell us what it is that they need. So it is a iterative relationship. It's not we impose, we ask, right? Tell us what it is that you need. What is it that you're looking for? What is it that you want? Where is the guidance? What kind of guidance can we provide you? And so we don't necessarily presume to know the content of that, but we would expect that we're there at school to learn and to learn a lot of things. And we present ourselves as teachers. And those teachers are not only faculty. They are as much other students, the GRAs, the graduate students who live in the dorms with them, the staff members with whom they come in contact with, their athletic coaches, the spiritual staff. There are lots of teachers, right? And so some part of it is to say we are all kind of teaching each other, and that and you may seek out guidance from those who you think can provide it for you. So it's mostly encouraging students to think about some self-reflection, what it is that you need. And if we need to kind of prompt, give some ways of saying, this is what you maybe want, maybe this is what you want to think about. We're perfectly comfortable in doing that. But we recognize that each student comes to MIT in there with their own set of concerns. And our job is to, in certain ways, help them to help surface those and to meet them.
Thank you for that. I'm really struck. I mean, we're an institute focused on science and technology. We, of course, have a strong School of Humanities, Arts, and Sciences. The conversation today, I've heard so many, each of you just talk about the importance of communication asking for what you need, expressing your opinions and your ideas, looking for connection, that all of that kind of work is really what can help move forward the science and technological possibilities that are in the heads of our faculty and of our students.
Yeah, one thing, just to say,
Yes.
we are a place that loves numbers, right? Data
Right.
and such. But in certain ways, for DSL, the only number that matters is one, each student. At the end of the day,
that.
we deal individually with each
Yep.
student. That's what it comes down to. And so lots of numbers, but in the end, one is the number.
It's a great number. All right. And I want to move to sort of a numbers question that is slightly lighthearted. So it's for Sally. It's striking to see such a lineup of women at the top of MIT's administration. Is this just a coincidence, or is there a way to explain it analytically?
So first of all, I think it's fantastic. But honestly, I think it's just a matter of women finally having opportunity. And when each one of these positions was filled, and I should say, these wonderful choices were made by my predecessor, but I know from talking with him, but also from sort of the general practice in academia, there are a lot of people who are interested in roles. You look across the landscape to see what the talent is, and the best possible talent for that moment emerges. And I think in this case, the talent pool was great, and these women rose to the top of the talent pool, and MIT was incredibly lucky that they said yes. And so, it is about numbers, but it's the randomness in a very small randomness of small numbers. There's not that many of us in this group, and it could have been all men just as well randomly, but at this time and this place, these women rose to the top of the pool.
We're lucky the numbers were in our favor, would be what I would say to that. That's great. All right, we're moving toward the end. I've got one more question for Cindy. I wonder if you want to say anything at the local level, if you have some insight on this, how the schools and departments and labs and centers provide and promote leadership opportunities for the faculty. How does the pipeline work? Is it one pipeline? Is it many little ones?
I think it's many opportunities at many different levels. So when I was describing my trajectory, you can assume a leadership role first of your lab group. And then that can expand to a leadership of a center, leadership of a department, leadership of the institute. So there are various levels. And there are, there's a challenge actually in getting people to recognize that the opportunity is one that can be complementary to their research and teaching and fulfilling, as you heard from some of our stories. So we have different programs in place at the Institute offered through the Office of Faculty Programs that introduce our faculty to leadership opportunities and provide insights around how to be an effective department head, how to have tough conversations, etc. So yeah, we work hard to introduce faculty to these other opportunities and try to incentivize them to move into these roles.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that behind the curtain of academia is a mystery to many people. So it was nice to just hear a little bit about, as a practical matter, how that all happens. So I wanted to give each of you a chance to, you can think of it as offering advice to those listening or offering advice to your younger self. I don't know, about something about leadership at this scale, or, how do you find a moment when you think that's success, when what does success look like at this level? Sometimes in my experience, it can be kind of murky because what we're working on, you all are working on, has such long-term implications and so many pieces and parts. So think of this as just kind of a quick round robin as we close out, a piece of advice that is helpful at leadership at this level, when you're at leadership at this level. I wonder, Sally, if you'd start us off with your thoughts, since you're in that particular hot seat at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think successful leadership at this level is sort of what Maria was saying. You know, you can act locally, I think, and look globally. You have to have a good sense of whether the people whose work you're trying to enable feel that they're making progress at the local level. And then you have to really aggregate across the whole and see if all that progress looks like it's actually going to move the needle on any area you're interested in. So on a very day-to-day basis, I think all of us get a lot of feedback from our colleagues as to how things are going. And it's not only whether they're personally happy or whether they had a good day. At MIT, it's really about whether they feel their work is a success, whether they're solving important problems, and whether things are moving forward. So our successes as leaders are gauged by how the community feels their work is progressing. And we just have to always keep our ear to that feedback. And then over time, again, see if it amounts to a real push forward in the areas we care about.
That sounds like an excellent formula and one that's working well so far in this chapter of MIT's history. I wonder, Maria, if you have a thought from your perspective.
Yeah, it's very similar. You know, we collect metrics on everything. You know, we're very numerically oriented here, and the community reacts well to numbers, and actually they're persuaded by numbers. And we've seen many cases of that. But you know, I count success by when I meet with my direct reports, lab and center directors, about how they feel things are going. And you know, that sometimes I will provide a little funding just for something or other, because they, you know, if things are not going quite right and they need a little bit of a readjustment, or somebody needs a little readjustment in their research program. And but yeah, it's actually very personal, and it's how people feel that I really think is you know, to me personally, in terms of how I operate, how I measure success.
Love that. Thank you. Cindy, and then Melissa.
Yeah, pretty much following along the same theme. I think I said at the beginning that I view the job as really helping everyone do their best work. And so I think success, when I most feel success, is when I feel like, because of the leadership role, I have knowledge of something going on, or metrics, as Maria said, that we've measured, or I know about activities that I can share with the people I'm talking to who might not know about those things, so that their efforts somehow are enhanced and it helps them do their best work.
Yeah, you're acting as sort of a collector, aggregator, network enhancer in your own role. That's great. Melissa.
So there's not much I can add to what's been said, since I largely agree. I think I would just end by saying, you know, I would judge success by having whatever the goals that I'm thinking about, that I've left MIT, the office, a bit better off than when I entered. That something has changed in the way that the next person who comes in says, I'm building on that. I felt when I came after Cindy, she handed me the baton, and I'm running with the baton, and at some point I'm going to hand it to someone else. And in each one of us, we try to leave the institution better than we found it, and also better positioned to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. So if we can do that, I consider that success.
Thank you. Well, audience, I hope you are ready to leave as inspired as I am. I will, on your behalf, thank our leaders of MIT for spending this hour with us and sharing their insights. And I would just invite those of you in the audience who might want to join our next Alumni Forum, November 15th, where the topic will be Quantum, the Hope, the Hype, and the Glory. Please mark your calendars for November 15th. And again, thank you to our leaders. This was a tremendously insightful and inspiring conversation.